This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and this is the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra 5G. We're in the United States, so we have the Snapdragon with the 5G modem inside. Yes, there have been other reviews, and they've been earlier. We got it a couple of days later than some of our reviewer friends out there. And also, I was waiting a bit longer because there was word that Samsung had a camera software update that had been out in Korea. I thought maybe we would get it here. No such love. So it's time to review this absolute behemoth of a phone. We're going to look at it now. This phone is going to have a hard time, obviously, because of its price tag. It's $1399. That's $1,400 for the base model in the United States. So for that much money, you're expecting a lot. It doesn't flip and bend like the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip, which is actually $20 cheaper. But it is Samsung's new phone that goes even above their already flagship S20, S20 Plus line to try to throw in every possible high-end feature you can think of. And I will give them credit for that. Of course, you still get the same processor and the same technology for RAM and storage. If you go with the S20 or the S20 Plus, you get that Snapdragon 865 with the X55 5G modem inside. But what you get here is a 5,000 milliamp battery, so that's the biggest among all of them yet for battery capacity. You get the fanciest cameras, and believe me, we will talk about the cameras some. It's got the biggest display, 6.9 inches versus 6.7 inches for the S20 Plus. Now, 0.2 inches, which is 5 millimeters, isn't a huge difference, yet this phone is a lot bigger, and I'll talk about that in a minute too. You've got 8K video recording, which you do get on the other phones as well. So here's, we're already seeing some of the problem, is that the less expensive phones have some of the same features. Now, granted, the S20 Plus is still $1,199, $1,200. Your base S20 is $1,000. Blame part of that on the Qualcomm Snapdragon new CPU and modem, which adds about $200 to the price tag. And Qualcomm is charging manufacturers considerably more than they did with the outgoing processor. So if this was a $1,200 phone, maybe you'd be a little bit more forgiving of it. You get the idea there. When it comes to the size, even though it's only 0.2 inches bigger in screen size than the S20 Plus, it's considerably thicker, about a millimeter thicker than the S20 Plus. And it weighs 222 grams. This is a half-pound phone. The thickness and the weight have worn on me. If you watched my Smackdown between the S20 Plus and the Ultra, you know this, or even my S20 review, watch that too if you're interested in that phone. It's fine when you play with it in the store and you think, oh, I can handle this, not much of a difference. You live with it for a week or 2 weeks and it's a consideration. And then when you consider the case you're going to have to put on there, which is going to have to be thicker than normal to cover that very large camera hump on the back, it's a bit of a physical beast. And it comes in your choice of black, which is perfectly fine, and a lot of people like a black phone. And your other option is gray. I know, gray, right? I mean, we talk about it's a gray day, battleship gray, not the greatest of connotations. It's surprising for a flagshipy phones, usually you get the most awesome color options. They're to try to upsell you to that really pretty color, but no. If you go with the other S20 models, you'll actually get a more broad color selection. It's a very pretty color. All right, I am picking on the phone. What's good about the phone is it's fast, it's solid, it's stable, it's very competent. That Snapdragon 865 is a performer. You get 12 gigs of RAM on the base model, which is more than enough for even power users, believe me. And you get 128 gigs of storage, which is slightly depressing for the price, but there is a micro SD card slot. You can go up to 16 gigs of RAM, which you really don't need, and 512 gigs of storage, which is up to you if you do need, but then you're looking at a $1,600 phone. So in terms of One UI 2.0 and Android 10 on this, the phone is fast, it's fluid, and the days of Samsung and TouchWiz are long over. I don't expect this phone to slow down. I haven't encountered any weird bugs other than the challenge with autofocus on the camera, but that's a separate kind of issue. It's a good phone, and it has the top of the line of everything. So that's what stands in its favor. And for those of you who really like big, honking phones in your hand, this might be the phone for you. And if you like big honking phones, well, at least it is less expensive than the Samsung Galaxy Fold, right? So let's talk about that 100x space zoom for a minute. I know some of you are just making jokes about it's the perv camera or something like that. No, obviously it's marketing. Yes, it can go out to 100x and you can take moonshots with it, which is fun for some people. It's there so you can do that and say, look at my picture of the moon. Beyond that, obviously the sweet spot is going to be at lesser zooms, and that's where it really can be useful. Who is this for also, this phone? It's for those of you who like to shoot birds, wildlife, zoo, like I like to do, without having to bring along something insane. When I go to the zoo, This is what I take. Wait, it gets worse. When you zoom it out, this is how long it gets. Okay, this is a 300mm lens. This thing weighs several pounds. This is not fun to carry. Anybody who travels with me to the zoo is always like, can you spend less time playing with your giant camera and all that sort of thing. So when you think of it, it's a miracle. Yes, it's $1,400 phone, but still, it can sort of stand in for this. You're not going to get the same clarity on zoom, but if you're zooming at 5x, it looks really good. If you're going to 10x, it's still pretty usable. I wouldn't put them on Flickr at 10x, mind you, but for using something like Instagram and your social media shares and all of that stuff, it's actually pretty good. And it doesn't weigh 5 pounds like this whole thing does, which is a Sony a7 III, by the way, in case you're wondering. The display on this is lovely. I wouldn't say that the S20 Plus or the S20 are any less lovely. They're just smaller and smaller, depending on which one you pick. Same resolution, so the PPI, the pixel density, is slightly lower, actually, on this one because you're stretching out to a bigger screen, but it's still 511 PPI, which is so beyond what even the most eagle-eyed of us can see that, hey, it's great. The 120 hertz display, which is available across all the S20 models, is here, and I really like that. It means less blurry, motion blur. It makes your phone feel faster. It's a little easier on the eyes. You can only use right now that 120 hertz at the default resolution that Samsung always ships these phones at, which is the Full HD Plus resolution. So it's like 2400 by 1080 resolution. It's still super sharp at that, so I've been rolling with that. They say they are going to have an update that lets you run it at the max resolution, which is insanely high. You can see the specs on screen. I'm sure that will tank your battery life. The good news is here, especially with this 5,000 milliamp battery, running it at 120 hertz, maybe shorter by about half an hour for run times versus running it at the default Full HD plus 60 hertz. So it's totally worth it. In fact, I find that running it at the full QHD plus resolution is actually going to kill the battery faster than 120 hertz does. So cool. The display, just like the other models, is less curvy on the sides, which is one of my favorite things. So less accidental edge presses and a little hand-friendlier. It just feels a little better ergonomically. I'm thrilled with that. And yes, it has a fingerprint scanner under the display. They have changed the location a little bit to make it easier to actually hit it, but it's the same technology as the S10 family, which means it's sometimes a little bulky. Better software, I would say. I get fewer fails, but I still get some, which is a little infuriating. There's 2D facial recognition, which isn't the most secure. You could, in theory, fool it with a big picture of you, for example, but it's there for those quick unlocks when you're at home and you're not, hopefully, worried about your family unlocking it on you or something like that. You got Samsung Pay, as you would expect, the usual knocks for security, and fast wireless charging, and also bidirectional charging, so you can charge Samsung Galaxy Buds or your Samsung Galaxy Watch Active 2. You get the idea, and it supports fast, or super fast, as they call it now, wired charging. You get a 25-watt charger in the box. It also supports 45 watts. So 25 watts is a lot faster than your standard charger. Going up to 45 doesn't make that much of a difference, probably because they have to keep heat in check while charging it. It has a 40-megapixel selfie camera, which can also shoot at 10 megapixel, doing pixel binning, which is the same resolution as the lesser S20 models. And it's fine if you turn off all the features that you can possibly do, like, Bixby and filters and all that sort of thing. You can get some detail and clarity, but to me it still looks a little bit more smooth and softened than, say, the S20 Plus or competing cameras. The main cameras are obviously the big selling point because Samsung has pushed them as such. It's not the first time we've seen 100 plus megapixel sensors on cameras, but so far the ones I've reviewed have been moderate fails in terms of the image processing not being there. Compared to other phones with this megapixel count, which is 108, Samsung is doing really well here. It's not perfect, but I have to give them credit for having the, on average, nicest, most crispy, most color balanced that I've seen so far. That's not to say it's perfect, as you know by now probably. There are autofocus issues. It's using phase detection autofocus, which is not as good as the usual dual pixel autofocus that we see on the regular S20 models and other camera phones. It's a little bit slower. How fast they can ever make it, I don't know, but there's supposed to be a fix out there to improve it and to stop it from hunting. The hunting is most noticeable when you're shooting video because that's continuous and you can see it focusing in and out, sometimes as it has a little fail. But I've gotten plenty of nice shots on it. But occasionally I've gotten some where I do wonder exactly what it was focusing on. It's just not as sharp as it should be. But overall, you can take some beautiful pictures with this. And it does have a little bit better dynamic range. It has a bigger overall sensor to work with, which helps. There's a lot of clarity. You can shoot in 108 megapixel mode, but I do recommend the default pixel binning mode where it combines the data and gives you really a sharp shot. There's even some natural bokeh happening given the size of the aperture, which is f1.8, and the size of the sensor together, so you don't always have to rely on portrait mode. But there is a time of flight sensor or depth sensor on this phone, so just like the S20 Plus, so it can do bokeh mode or portrait mode nicely, and it has very good edge detection. There's one place where it does beat out the iPhone. You don't get as much of a haircut, for example, when using portrait mode on somebody with a little flyaway hair like mine. The wide-angle camera is 12 megapixel. It's perfectly competent. It's the same Sony sensor that we see on the other S20 phones, and I like it quite well. You do have night mode on that, which is something that the iPhone still doesn't offer on the wide-angle lens. The tele lens is 48 megapixel, which is actually less than the S20 Pluses, that has 64, but this one actually is a true telephoto. The S20 Pluses is not. Watch my S20 review, S20 Plus review to learn more about that, but the telephoto does a pretty good job. The challenge is going to be keeping the camera stable when you're shooting at longer zoom ranges, just like with that big honking camera I showed you. Anything with that kind of lens magnifies movements. So overall, with the telephoto lens, the default when you choose a telephoto lens is to go to 5x. 4x is actually its optical zoom maximum range, but 5x takes very nice shots. It's not going to compete with that Sony A7 III for telephoto shots, though sometimes for standard range shots it can. But the telephotos are pretty good. You'll see a little bit of artifacting here and there, a little bit of interpolation, but mostly really quite nice. You might even share some of them on Flickr. 10x can be usable, but I would keep it to smaller presentation modes. Again, not big monitor showing off your kind of pictures, but nice. Anything beyond that gets a little iffy. It's pretty cool when you can zoom to the crane on the top of the building and use 30x zoom, which is about the maximum for its MS. And yes, there's 8K video recording, only 24 frames per second, and you don't get any stabilization on it, so it's good if you want to crop in, maybe, for video. But other than that, again, they're doing it better than any phone I've seen with 8K video recording. We've reviewed just a handful of those that even try to do that, and it really is remarkable how good it looks, but there are some limitations. So other things to keep in mind when considering this phone is 5G. So it covers all the 5G bands that are low, mid, and millimeter wave high band. There's not a lot of coverage right now, except for T-Mobile has a pretty decent rollout of low band 5G, and I've been running it actually with the T-Mobile SIM most of the time. And yeah, what is interesting though is the speed differences that I've noticed in 4G LTE coverage zones on both AT&T and T-Mobile. It's actually faster at download and upload speeds on those versus the S10 Plus and even the Galaxy Z Flip running on the Snapdragon 855 and 855 Plus and their modems respectively. So you'll get faster data speeds even on regular 4G networks. That's nice. For those of you who are buying the unlocked model direct from Samsung or wherever in the United States, it is compatible with all major carriers, CDMA, GSM. I get Wi-Fi calling on T-Mobile. I get voice over LTE on even AT&T. They're finally supporting that for unlocked phones, and of course on T-Mobile and on Verizon. So you can buy the unlocked model. It's totally safe. Oh, one last thing. If you shake your phone, I don't know how people even notice this and do this, but to shake the phone and you hold it close to your head and you hear a slight bit of rattling, that's the OIS, the optical image stabilization. What it is basically a gyroscope that the sensor mounts to keep it level so it can move around and stay level. So there's nothing wrong with your phone if you hear that. That's just the OIS assembly. In fact, once you engage the camera, you probably won't hear it because it's locking in the stabilization at that point. So there you have it, the Samsung Galaxy S20 Ultra, Samsung's yet another notch up above the S20 line for 2020. Is it a good, fast, stable phone with a really pleasing display and promising cameras that might not deliver everything we hoped for $1,400 and all of the promises? Well, yeah, but for those of you who really want a big phone and have a use for that zoom range, it's here for you. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more cool tech videos and a thumbs up if you like this vid.